Okie dokie, another excellent example of poor life decisions on my end. The new patch came through for Drone Apocalypse, and this happened just a couple of hours ago. And as a result, they released a bunch of other stuff that isn't pertinent to this video, but in any case, they notably changed the values of a lot of structural parts. Now, this is sort of a follow-up, kind of along the same lines as the analysis of proposed cabin speed changes that I made earlier in the week / last week, however you want to look at that, where basically I have already spreadsheet the values of structural parts, and in fact I did a analysis of it in the past. I will note that some of the values in this were wrong, but nonetheless I've done an analysis in the past. Some people were interested for it, and some people asked for further analyses, which I proceeded to not do for a year. But in any case, this is just looking at the stats of structural parts in the game of Crossout, effectively the analysis of what each of them is most effective for, as was the case with this old ratio, and then the changes that occurred as a result of the new patch, which, as they've said, is primarily focused at shifting the power score and durability of heavier parts. So to that end, we're going to open up a monstrous spreadsheet. So this is something that I completed no less than, or I guess no more than 2 days ago, where basically I took every single structural part in the game, including ones that I didn't have unlocked. I took their power score, their durability, and their mass as per the object description, then calculating via the damage pass-through and melee resistance mechanics their effective durability and their melee durability, and then going through and using tactics in finding which weld point / connector pips were empty, which ones were full, which one were partially filled. I determined the value of the volume of most of the parts. There are some exceptions which are highlighted in orange text because I do not own them, which is what the orange text over here means, and because without further testing it's not completely clear whether or not I'm correct. So I feel reasonably confident on my value for any numbers in black, but any ones in orange I'm unable to test, and likewise any items in orange I don't own, but if they have a black value then I feel pretty confident in the approximate size of them based off of other items. So yeah, this was looking at min-maxing. I've considered doing it for quite a while. I explicitly did it for Arena to try and figure out how to actually make some sort of durable build for fighting the pandemic of Spitfire dogs that were everywhere. If you didn't run into them, all the better. But yeah, in short, was getting thrashed by people with like a bunch of fused blue weapons, which didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So in any case, I was trying to make a tank build to get around that. As a result, I literally did this and spreadsheet everything, and then I didn't like announce my findings or do the video like I'm currently kind of doing, because they announced that they were going to be changing up all the structural parts. So yeah, most of this work kind of went down into the toilet, but as a result of me having all of these values put in ahead of time, I can kind of look through and see what changed and like the trends again, just like with the proposed speed changes, and sort of what is a result of it. So to go very briefly over my findings with the original document, so again, all of these values are still the old ones from the pre-update. Basically, I was trying to figure out a way to get an actual like dynamic table working, so you can just ignore all of this, which is all part of a dynamic table, because it doesn't work. But in any case, I was looking at what would end up being the parts with the best durability per power score, so that's based off of their damage pass through, so it's the approximate, the tilde dura, the melee durability, the weapon durability, and the raw durability. So in this case, the raw durability was the ones particular to the Bastion build, since the cabin, of course, benefits from, you know, the raw durability of something. It doesn't gain the benefits of the damage pass-through. You don't get 50 durability off of a buggy engine cover. With the Bastion, you only get the 5 listed on it. So I don't need the damage pass-through, I don't need the melee dura, and then I was working on sort of parsing it down further, so again, I could do all of these calculations separately, or, well, in one table rather than doing them all separately. But in any case, I did another one, which was just looking at the raw durability per power score, which is particular to, again, Arena with the power score limit, and then taking out all the bumper parts that weren't, again, contributing to health, because as you can see, for just raw durability of parts, bumpers are at the top for a large portion of it. And then, of course, we weren't taking into account power score into this, because this is just, again, the raw durability of items sorted from high to low. So, yeah, this ended up being somewhat useful. The big problem is a lot of these parts are itty-bitty and thus not actually that useful in slapping on a build, because you'd very quickly hit the part limit, especially when there's ones that you have like 8 to 12 of them. But in any case, the larger parts, or at least the ones I own, like for instance, I don't have any of the war pieces, but knowing that like the APC side part should, for instance, take priority over things like armored hatches, it's just good info to know. So yeah, it seems pretty straightforward enough, at least with my original plans with it. In any case, now that everything has been upsought, I am basically going to be looking at the differences between them. And this is going to be a continuation of the faction structural part ratios that I originally posted a year ago. And as a result, all of these people are being pinged again. So sorry if you have stopped playing Crossout in the meantime. In any case, for the actual up-to-date document that we can look at, I did end up... That's the wrong one. Color coding it, thus my confusion as to why that wasn't color coded. And I'm looking at the overall generalized results of it, which I think is going to be a lot more useful information to the layperson. So to start with, I basically took all of the old values, which are here on the right, which I know is somewhat counterintuitive. This is me just interjecting the old values from that other spreadsheet into this current updated sheet, so I didn't want to shuffle stuff around. That's why there's also some columns hidden. But in any case, these are all the old values. These are all the new values. Any change that is a positive, not as a numerical positive, but better for the person using them, has been, or rather more efficient for whatever the purpose is, has been marked in green. Anything that has been affected negatively, of which in this case there's none, would be marked in red. So just going through what the green actually means, if it's a reduction in power score, it's going to be green. So for instance, the buggy corners went from 7 power score to 5. It's a positive because power score and mass are both effectively negative. They are going to be the limits imposed on your vehicle on top of the part limit, whereas durability, the effective durability, of course, and then the durability per power score, mass, and volume are counted as positive if they go up. It's interesting to note, and this is something that I'll get into a little bit more in depth when we get into the last column, but the durability per volume is a positive for going up, but in some cases you'll actually want it to go down, and that would be in the cases of spaced armor, where you're actually looking at covering a wider area of somebody's view or a wider part of the build. It could, in theory, be beneficial to use a bunch of extremely light parts without very much durability to, in theory, catch more shots, have more break points where the damage doesn't get attributed to another item behind it. So yeah, that's kind of a sort of one, but I mean, there's other considerations, of course, power score and mass again. And like people's interest in armor density, of course, is going to be different because, for instance, if you're just making a straight up tanky build or doing something in raids or whatnot, you don't really need them for the most part, or spaced armor, that is. So, yeah, going straight forward with it, it's interesting to note that the buggy corners got a decrease in value, like I said, from 7 to 5, and as a result, their durability per power score got increased. That being said, I could have very possibly made a typo, and that's why this is the only like damage pass-through part that's actually covered in it. But I don't know for sure, so I am including it. There's also some shenanigans down at bumpers, but in any case, for the most part, a lot of things, almost everything in the game got a power score decrease. I'm just looking at this column for the time being. Some got a durability and as a result an effective durability increase, but of course these two values are effectively going to be the same because any damage pass-through values were maintained. So if it goes up, and when it goes up in the other. So, I mean, this is basically just one column, but showing the difference between their listed durability and their effective durability as a result of damage pass-through, assuming, of course, ideal conditions, which isn't always the case. But as a result, basically anytime a column over here goes green, gets increased, their according column, on the other hand, gets increased. So durability affects the durability across the board, and power score affects the durability per power score calculation. So something that has a decrease in power score and an increase in durability is going to see a significantly higher durability per power score bump than something that only has one of those increase. Just because that's how math works. Yeah, so pretty straightforward for most of these. Generally, the heavier the part is, the more of a benefit it got. I didn't actually hash out the specifics on a per part basis as to what the percentile or like raw numerical increases, but as a result of the sort of summary section on the right, I felt that was unnecessary. Interesting to note that there have only been a few bumpers that were affected, and again, it's possible that I mistyped on some of them. That was my original thought when I saw the back end having a durability of 118 now when I recorded 107, but seeing it also on multiple syndicate bumpers leads me to believe that these specific bumpers, which are all the four most newly added bumpers, is actually due to changes of the values on the developer's part. But I don't know for sure. As a result of most of the bumper values not being changed, so none of the calculations for power score, durability, effective durability, mass, etc., and thus the values for the durability per not shifting, the overall effect is that the sort of best in slot effectiveness of bumpers for their insane durability is going to be decreased compared to the heavier structural pieces. So I am just going to sort of extrapolate from what they said in the patch notes. I'm guessing that they want people to rely less on things like the train plow, not only for wedging, but also for maybe armor in all cases, because they're looking at increasing the relative effectiveness of all the structural parts sans the bumpers. Now, whether or not that's actually true or the case or whatnot, I certainly couldn't say. Again, I didn't do all of these calculations updated, but beforehand it was very prominently including damage pass-through parts and bumper parts. So if I run these calculations again with the newer stuff, maybe some of these values will shift around. I mean, generally, if you're running something with an insane amount of power score and mass penalty, like the train plow or the freight train plow, I imagine it's primarily because you want to have like the hardest armor, the most armor in an area possible, sans the case of course, when you're running damage pass-through. So I don't think that'll affect it too much as far as shifting stuff around on the list. It's just that the option of using multiple armor pieces instead of these is, again, more appealing. On the other hand, because damage pass-through parts were for the vast majority and possibly exclusively not touched other than than this, if this were a mistake, I think like the elbows weren't touched. If we go to Syndicate, yeah, the damage pass-through parts for the elbows weren't touched. And then I don't think there's a whole lot of other parts. Or it would be these Firestarter Pestilence parts. So those actually did get a power score decrease. And thus the catheters and vial, which are already, as you may have seen on the other sheet, at the top of the list for effectiveness for durability per power score, just became even higher in value, which is kind of crazy. So I don't know if that was an intentional change or not, but in any case, we're operating off of the assumption of ideal scenario for their effective durability compared to their power score or whatnot, which of course is with every armoring guide whatsoever, especially with the spaced armor builds. running damage pass-through parts is always sort of ludicrous amount of durability for the other stats it costs in general. So this is not necessarily anything new, but for the most part, they weren't touched. So there's that, I guess, where again, they're looking at making the traditional durability of items, I think, a little bit more important and prominent. Perhaps as a result of me at some point later on, or maybe somebody else just ripping the data that I'll post, there is a significant upset in what is actually the most effective for specific builds and the order of these, but I'm not going to worry about that too much because I shouldn't really even be doing a video at 3:30 a.m. anyway, but I am. So yeah, we'll try and limit the amount of excessive time spent on stuff, especially since I already did most of the color coding and analysis in comparison before I even turn on the camera here, so for the last hour or so. In any case, as to the sort of summary of parts, the list of ones I've selected is sort of a continuation of the ones that showed up in the faction structural parts ratio. So notably, there's been different parts added, there's been more syndicates, etc. I also did high density calculations for all of the bumper pieces. These values, assuming that you agree with the approximate volume stat, or if I don't, didn't put in the wrong value for stuff, which I did. I know, for instance, for the control module for Dawn's Children, it's not a 16 pip piece, it's only 8. But these values should effectively be the same, except for the 4-ish bumpers that I said the values may have changed on. But in any case, as a result of these values staying constant and the other ones increasing, as you can see in the comparison spreadsheet, the overall effectiveness of bumpers, again, is reduced in comparison. So, and that's very much, whether or not you agree with that specific statement or not, it's effectively the same conclusion that people reach as a result of nerfing medium and light cabins speed being a effective buff to heavy cabins, because now they're not as slow in comparison. So they kind of took the opposite approach on this this balancing, where instead of taking the extreme outliers and reducing them, they kind of took the underperforming ones and furthered them, as well as bringing up the other ones. But in any case, looking at what this section actually means, it should be pretty straightforward for the color coding bands and the pre and post work, which is definitely saying post and not just me copy pasting the text without updating it. In any case, it kind of boils down to talking about what the different durability per stats are useful for, as well as how volume is actually calculated. So as I said in the original post here, I was using the most full piece from each faction, and by what it means it is full is that it completely fills each of its constructor cubes. So what that means is if you're looking at abstract or abstract shapes, maybe ones that don't have meshes that match the colliders, if you don't have straight edges, if you have curves, if you have welding points and pips missing and whatnot, those are not as full as, say, just a solid square or a solid rectangle with all of the pip faces available. So what I did for this is I took a look at the faction and part types based off of just what it calls the part as a part of when you hover over the item. And this is in the default order of the structural parts in the list. So if you sort by power score, mass, or durability, whatever, you'll get a different order. But I did it this way as opposed to the original one. This was just the approximate order in which you might get them based off of how they show up. So like just from left to right in the factions tree. As a result, you kind of got a scatter shot of these values, which made it sort of harder to directly compare, I think. So this is hopefully a lot easier. In any case, it is directly in line literally with what the system designers in the games are doing. So yeah, that's why you have Buggy, Floor, and Fryer. You don't necessarily have the largest part. So for instance, the engineers van parts, I use the minivan sideboard, which is only 10 pips of volume, where the rear van door or whatever it's called is like 6x6, so 36 or so, but it has curves, it has parts missing. So I'm basically operating off of the assumption that the system designers looked at a specific part type for a specific faction, so be it the van for the engineers, the bus for the fire starters, the container scrap for scavengers, whatever. They assigned approximate power score, durability, and mass for that specific type, and then it just extrapolated it to working anything else. So if you had a part that was half the volume, then it should in theory have half of these other stats as well, and that's more or less true. And I mean, I'm not going to do an in-depth like comparison of that right now, but for instance, in general, anything that has the same power score or durability stat within a group will likewise have a comparable mass. Or sorry, I guess I should say similar volume and durability is equal to similar power score and mass. So for instance, if we look at the pipe shield and the quarter wall, you see literally exactly the same values. So as a result, if you have something that's half, like the straight pipe, then you have half of those values as well. And obviously there's some rounding. As a result, I basically chose the largest pieces possible to hopefully take the rounding / outlier values and make it a minimal part of the overall calculation. Whether or not I succeed in that, I don't know, but in any case, the color scales look pretty and are like almost exactly in line with what I'd expect. So that sort of explains what how the parts were chosen. The ones that weren't put in, so for instance, the prestige packs or the syndicate parts, are because of their extreme outlier in shape, size, inability to get a really solid count on volume. In the case of syndicate, there's also a enormously wide swing in the durability per volume on some of them, even if I do sort of best guess the volume. So I just have neglected to include those on purpose, just for the sake of hopefully making this a little bit easier to digest and a little bit more transparent. Yeah, so the other thing to keep in mind with this is I did not include the calculations for the banding stripes, the color stripes for the damage pass-through parts, the frame parts, because as you can see, they are incredibly high compared to the other categories, and as a result, they'll basically turn everything else into like red, with like shades of red like here, but for the entire thing, just because everything is so far away from the values here. And that's due in large part to the fact that I'm using the effective durability rather than just the straight durability. And come to think of it now, as I'm talking about it, this is literally the only one where the effective durability is different than the actual physical durability, so I probably could have just gone with regular durability. But in any case, I think it's an important outlier and sort of points out why there's so much power score on these parts, as well as why you see them in use like everywhere. Which is to say that just damage pass-through gets kind of cracked. Likewise with bumpers. So looking at the themes to begin with, like I said, it's literally in order from top to bottom. I don't know what these values actually are with the regular parts. I guess I could just hard code it in, but whatever, I'm not going to worry about that at this point. But ignoring the engineer's frame buggy floor and just going down the list, you can see a increase in durability per power score, corresponding to a decrease in durability per mass. So what that's to say is that the lighter parts are better for giving you durability for every point of mass it is, whereas the heavier parts are better for giving you durability per power score, and that's sort of just an antagonistic relationship they have here. You'll note that volume is like almost exactly in line with the power score as well. So I suspect that's not a coincidence. And again, if you're wanting sort of negative armor density, so a lower durability for a larger volume, then that sort of makes sense that these values are also directly in line with each other, and just having power score and mass being antagonistic, which makes sense. This is pretty straightforward. The heavier parts, they weigh a hell of a lot more, but they're not as power score heavy, and you get a ridiculous amount of durability off of them too for just the raw values. I say as I click on mass for the durability values. So comparing the pre and post rework results, you can see, or you could probably have guessed based off of all the green here, everything basically goes up in overall value. And again, this is looking at from like sort of a naive, more simple perspective of, okay, if we don't want to parse through all of this data, and if somebody were to just grab a screen grab of this and wanted to know what faction generally was best for doing what are the approximate values you can expect from that? And that's the goal of this. Again, this is sort of just showing trends more than anything. So you can see that very interestingly, the durability per mass like doesn't change very much at all. That's a result of, I think, very small durability changes, focusing more so on the power score. So you can see, for instance, even just for the death parts, it got bumped from 19 to 21, 56 to 59. These are not significant values compared to a decrease of power score from 44 to 32. And likewise, that's the case for, again, most of these. So if you look at, say, even the APC rear, it dropped from 62 to 45 power score, so a decrease of about 25% for a less than 20% increase in durability. So that's primarily what they're looking at, is doing power score. Now, on the one hand, this means that making tank builds is a lot more viable without kicking up into significantly higher power scores. And actually, if I look at the power scores of my builds, there's probably been significant shifts. Yeah, so I had a build at 12,000, it dropped down to 9,400, which is to say that if I took off the fuel tanks, I could have used that in Arena, but I wasn't able to due to it being like a 10, 12,000 power score build otherwise. Some of my 9,000s dropped to about 8,800, but these are the shotgun builds I was bringing into it anyway. My heaviest builds only lost about 600 power score. And they're in the 14,000 bracket, so that's not much of a significant jump in any case. But obviously it lets you slap on more durability with that drop in power score, and as a result, now each piece of durability gets you further for less power score cost than before. So, like I said, this isn't really where the bulk of the changes happen, I think. Obviously, you get a more pronounced effect the lower you go into it. The heavier the part you get, and that's a result, I mean, directly of their goals. But you'll see that the relative values, which is the shading that Xbox did as a result of its... Oh dear, okay. Well, I guess I might have to manually upload this video afterwards, considering how the stream just cut out. But in any case, my internet cut out. Excellent. Well, I guess that's something I can just post of myself later if need be. Very cool internet, thank you. I mean, to be fair, 4 AM is probably an ideal time to be updating this sort of data and not so much to be streaming analysis videos, but in any case, continuing on with this, yeah, the bigger shift is by far in power score, so you can see about a 25% increase in the Lunatic's durability per power score, whereas when you get to the bottom, it basically has a, what is that, a shift of 60-ish%. So 2 to 3 times as significant of a shift as the Lunatics, and as a result, the color scale, of course, all shifts relatively. So yeah, suffice to say they focused a lot more again on the power score shift and not so much on the mass shift, although there is still values there, but they kept the overall relative scores of the categories to each other the same. It was kind of an overall system shift rather than a rebalancing of how Steppenwolfs or fire starters look at durability and mass in accordance to each other. So it's also going to be very hard to post this video without internet. But yeah, basically any of the conclusions that you could reach beforehand are going to be very much the same afterwards, as far as what's going to be best for spaced armor, what's going to end up being best for making bricks and heavy builds, and again, how they all relate to each other. I think it's worth noting too, because I don't recall mentioning it earlier, the reason why the flaming rakes is in red is because there is no hot rod part that actually like fills a grid fully, like I, attempted to reach with all these other part examples. So as a result, I just used the closest approximation, threw it in red just to note that there might be some actual differences in the system design that they have and the expected values for them. But overall, I think, of course, the trend and their relation to others is going to be effectively the same. So yeah, I think that basically covers everything I was looking to talk about with this shift. Again, if people are so inclined, since I'm going to post the full list, which is to say the before and after as a side-by-side image in a imager gallery, one could theoretically go through and make these new calculations if you cared for them. I may or may not do them later if they feel like they're requested, but I feel like the sort of themes that you are getting and understanding from this is more important than, say, a extremely granular list of what is the absolute best part for any given situation, especially because, once again, when I did that before, especially for the raw durability per power score with no bumper, you got a bunch of really shitty small pieces which are kind of hard to work around. So I think that will basically conclude the stream. Yeah, excellent. Cool. Well, hopefully anybody who is watching this found this useful. I will make sure the upload went through properly, and then I'll go through add chapters and then post it on Reddit at the people that were part of the prior discussion. And hopefully people will find this illuminating.